3 engines on one jet. Not 2, not 4, 3. It sounds like an engineering dare, like someone lost a bet at Boeing and said, "Fine, slap another one on the tail, see what happens." But here's the thing, it actually worked. For decades, the skies were ruled by these 3-engine beasts. They weren't experiments, they weren't prototypes. They were the backbone of global aviation. You've seen them. The Boeing 727 screaming off runways with that tail engine howling like a vacuum cleaner from hell. The Lockheed L-1011, a spaceship-looking wide-body with its bizarre E-to-Z duct curving like a bendy straw into the tail. The McDonnell Douglas DC-10, equal parts magnificent and mildly terrifying, depending on which news headline you read. For years, Trijets were the cool middle child of aviation. Not as glamorous as the 4-engine jumbos, not as bare bones as the little twins. They were the just right solution. Until suddenly they weren't. Today, they've all but vanished, except for a handful dragging cargo or lurking in billionaires' hangars as business jets. So what happened? Why did Trijets go from aviation's next big thing to history's awkward footnote? This is the rise, the reign, and the spectacular fall of the Trijet Aviation's most brilliant, flawed idea. Strap in, because this is going to be like a 3-engine takeoff. Noisy, dramatic, and a little unstable at times. Picture the skies in the early 1960s. Aviation was booming. Jets had taken over from piston props. Passengers were flooding airports, and airlines wanted machines that could haul people efficiently without bankrupting them on fuel. But here was the dilemma. Big 4-engine jets like the Boeing 707 and Douglas DC-8 were powerful, but too thirsty for smaller routes. Twin jets were cheaper and simpler, but regulators, especially the FAA, had this rule. No twin-engine airliner could ever be more than 60 minutes from a diversion airport. That killed the idea of twins on ocean crossings or remote routes. Enter the Trijet, the Goldilocks jet. 3 engines solved the puzzle. Enough power and redundancy for safety regulators to nod in approval, but still cheaper and lighter than 4-engine brutes. It was like inventing the VCR in the 80s, sleek, practical, and everybody suddenly needed one. Boeing jumped in first with the 727 in 1963. This thing was a rocket. 3 Pratt & Whitney JT-8Ds strapped to a T-tail fuselage, built for short runways and smaller airports. Airlines loved it. Pilots adored it. Passengers got used to the deafening roar and cigarette smoke in the cabin. The 727 became one of the most successful jetliners ever, with over 1,800 built. Not to be outdone, Lockheed rolled out the L-1011 TriStar in 1970. If planes were rock stars, the L-1011 was the eccentric genius with crazy hair and sunglasses indoors. It had the S-duct feeding its tail engine, advanced Autoland systems, and passenger comforts like wide cabins and whisper-quiet interiors. It was ahead of its time, too ahead, in fact, but we'll get there later. Then came the DC-10, also in 1970, from McDonnell Douglas. It was big, bold, and pitched directly against Lockheed. Airlines loved the flexibility. Long haul, short haul, cargo, passenger. It was meant to be the jack of all trades, and for a while, it worked. Trijets were suddenly everywhere. Major airports were packed with them. Smaller cities that couldn't handle 747s welcomed 727s. The DK-10 and L-1011 flew across oceans with 3-engine swagger. For passengers, the Trijet was the future. And it wasn't just marketing. On paper, 3 engines were brilliant. Safety redundancy. If one quits, you've still got 2. Better economics than a quad. More flexibility than twins under FAA rules. Analogy time. It was like airlines were shopping for cars. The four-engine jets were SUVs. Huge, heavy, expensive. The two-engine jets were compacts, cheap, but not allowed on the highway yet. And the Trijet? The perfect sedan. Stylish, practical, and regulators let you take it anywhere. Airlines bought them in droves. Boeing's 727 dominated short haul. Lockheed and McDonnell duked it out in wide-body land. For a solid 15 years, the Trijet wasn't just a success. It was aviation's golden child. But every golden child has a curse. The very thing that made Trijets shine, 3 engines, would also plant the seeds of their downfall. Because technology doesn't stand still, and the rules of the game were about to change. The Trijet didn't just arrive, it took over. By the mid-1970s, aviation was basically a 3-engine block party. The Boeing 727 was everywhere. It owned domestic routes, it strutted into smaller airports that couldn't handle the 707, and it screamed down runways with that iconic tail engine sucking in everything short of luggage carts. Over 1,800 were built. You don't hit numbers like that unless airlines are drooling over your performance. Then there were the wide bodies. The DC-10 and L-1011 rolled onto the scene like dueling rock stars. Lockheed's L-1011 had the tech chops, an advanced autopilot that could literally land itself in fog, cabins that felt spacious, and whisper-quiet interiors that passengers actually noticed. It was smooth, futuristic, almost too refined for its own good. Meanwhile, McDonnell Douglas went with brute force charm. The DC-10 was loud, proud, and came in so many versions it could have filled out its own Netflix catalog. Long haul, short haul, cargo, you name it, the DC-10 was ready to do it. Airlines loved the flexibility. The DC-10 was like that flashy friend who could bartend, DJ, and somehow convince everyone to stay out till sunrise. This was the golden age of the Trijet. Airports in the 70s and 80s looked like Trijet car shows. Rows of 727s lined up like sneakers in a collector's closet. Wide-body Trijets were flying passengers across oceans with a mix of style and swagger. For the average traveler, flying on a Trijet was normal. You didn't think twice about it. Just like today, nobody blinks at getting on a 737 or an A320. And for a while, the 3-engine setup felt like genius. Redundancy? Check, 1 engine goes out, you've still got 2. Range? Check, you could cross oceans without FAA side-eye. Economics? Economics? Better than 4-engine brutes like the 747. It worked. It worked beautifully. But here's the thing about golden ages. They're usually golden because the clock's ticking, and the Trijet's clock was already winding down. Because while passengers were enjoying their wide seats and those futuristic S-duct tail intakes, engineers somewhere else were busy making twin jets stronger, leaner, and more reliable. It's the classic story. While one kid shines at the school talent show, another kid's grinding in the shadows. And by next year, that kid's the star quarterback. For Trijets, that shadow kid was the Twinjet. And soon, the twins weren't just catching up. They were about to lap the competition. But we'll get to the Twinjet Revenge Tour in Chapter 3. Before we move on, let's just stop and give Trijets their flowers. Because for that moment in history, they were kings of the skies. The L-1011 was basically Apple before Apple. The 727 was everywhere. And the DC-10? It was your unpredictable party animal that somehow always showed up. So yeah, this was peak Trijet. And peak Trijet was glorious. Hey, if you're still with me geeking out over 3-engine jets, you're one of my people. Seriously, hit that like button. It tells me you're just as obsessed with aviation's forgotten legends as I am. And if you're new here, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss the next crazy chapter in aviation history. Trust me, the Twinjet revenge story coming up, you don't want to miss it. If the Trijet was the king of the disco era, the Twinjet was punk rock, leaner, meaner, and ready to tear down the old order. Here's the setup. Trijets were cruising along, making airlines money and passengers happy, when suddenly engine technology had a glow-up. The new kids on the block were high-bypass turbofan engines. Massive, efficient, reliable power plants that could do what older engines couldn't. Produce the same thrust with fewer parts, less noise, and way less fuel. That was bad news for the three-engine club, because now 2 of these beasts could do the same job as 3 of the old ones. And airlines aren't sentimental. They're accountants with wings. If 2 engines could fly the same route for less money, guess which airplane they were signing checks for. And if you think Trijets were sweating, the FAA came in with the plot twist of all plot twists, ETOPS. ETOPS stands for Extended Range Twin Engine Operational Performance Standards. But pilots joke it really means engines turn or passengers swim. Basically, ETOPS said, okay, fine, we trust modern twin engines enough to let them fly hours away from diversion airports. Suddenly, that 60-minute rule that made Trijets essential? Gone. Twins could cross oceans, fly polar routes, and do it all while burning less fuel. Analogy time. Imagine your favorite nightclub had a strict dress code. Only people in tuxedos got in. Trijets were that tuxedo. Then one day the club goes, you know what, sneakers and jeans are fine. Suddenly, nobody bothers with tuxedos anymore. That's what ETOPS did to Trijets. And the timing? Brutal. Because right as ETOPS opened the skies, the Boeing 767 and Airbus A310 showed up in the early 80s, flexing their twin-engine power. By the 90s, the 777 rolled in like the heavyweight champion. 2 engines, intercontinental range, crazy efficiency. It was like watching the iPhone debut while you're still hyping your flip phone. Trijets had no answer. The economics were a bloodbath. Twins were cheaper to maintain. 2 engines instead of 3. Twins were more fuel efficient. Twins had fewer moving parts to break, which made maintenance schedules way friendlier. And passengers? They didn't care if the plane had 2, 3, or 4 engines. They just wanted cheaper tickets. Airlines followed the money, and the money was screaming, go twin or go home. But let's not sugarcoat it. Trijets didn't just lose because twins were better. They lost because twins got scary good. Engine manufacturers were hitting reliability levels nobody thought possible. The chance of a catastrophic double-engine failure became insanely small. By the mid-90s, flying over the Atlantic on 2 engines wasn't just legal, it was boringly safe. And that's the thing. Safety sells. Remember, one of the main reasons Trijets existed was redundancy. But if regulators and passengers no longer saw twins as risky, then the Trijet's entire identity, its whole reason for existing, collapsed. It's like being the designated driver in a group where suddenly everyone's sober. You're not special anymore. You're just extra. Meanwhile, Boeing and Airbus were happy to twist a knife. They pumped out Twinjet after Twinjet, each one better, cheaper, and more appealing to airlines than the last. The 777 in particular was a coffin nail, long-haul capability, insane efficiency, reliability stats through the roof. By the time the 787 and A350 showed up, it wasn't even a fight anymore. The Trijet went from essential to obsolete in less than 2 decades. That's fast in aviation terms. 1 minute you're the cool middle child everyone needs. The next, you're the forgotten cousin at the family reunion, muttering about the good old days. So yeah, twins didn't just take over. They torched the rulebook and rewrote aviation economics forever. And Trijets, they couldn't keep up. But if you think the Twinjet Takeover was the end of the story, hold up. Because there was another problem lurking that made Trijets even less appealing. It wasn't about rules. It wasn't about technology. It was about cold, hard cash and the reputation nightmares that haunted 3 engines in a row. And that, my friends, is where we're headed in Chapter 4, Trouble in the Tail. Every golden age has a crash landing, and for Trijets, it wasn't just about being outclassed by twins. Nope, the fall was juicier than that. It was about engineering headaches, nasty bills, and some very public PR disasters. Let's start with the obvious. 3 engines cost more than 2. It sounds stupidly simple, but it's the aviation equivalent of realizing 3 pizzas cost more than 2. Airlines are obsessed with margins. If you burn more fuel, need more maintenance hours, and pay more mechanics to babysit your fleet, you're toast. And that was the Trijet problem in a nutshell. The tail-mounted engine, the crown jewel of the Trijet look, was also a logistical nightmare. The 727's central engine had that snaking S-duct. It looked cool in diagrams, but when it came time to service it, good luck squeezing a mechanic up there. The DC-10 and L-1011 weren't much better. Tail engines were harder to access, costlier to maintain, and often demanded special equipment just to work on. Analogy time. It was like buying a car with the spark plugs hidden behind the seats. Sure, it drives fine until you need to fix something. Then you're swearing at the engineers who designed it. Now sprinkle in some bad press. The DC-10, for all its commercial success, got saddled with a reputation nobody wants: unsafe. The 1979 crash of American Airlines Flight 191 in Chicago, the deadliest aviation accident in U.S. History at the time plastered the DC-10's name across headlines. Never mind that it was a maintenance error, not an inherent design flaw. Public trust was shaken. Passengers started side-eyeing any plane with DC-10 on the boarding pass. And PR scars in aviation don't heal quickly. Fair or not, the words Trijet and safety were no longer best friends. Airlines started hedging bets with Twinjets, which by then had the shiny glow of new, efficient, reliable, modern. Meanwhile, Trijets had the vibe of expensive, complicated, maybe cursed. Lockheed's L-1011 had its own headaches. Technically brilliant, sure, but it was also plagued by delays, cost overruns, and Rolls-Royce nearly going bankrupt while trying to supply its engines. Great plane, bad timing. Add all this up and you get the perfect storm. Economics. 3 engines equals more costs. Engineering. Tail engines equals maintenance nightmares. Reputation. DC-10 disasters equals PR poison. Competition. Twins equals cheaper, sleeker, safer in the public eye. That combination is like being in a boxing match with 3 opponents at once. You can't win. By the mid-80s, Boeing quietly ended 727 production. Lockheed bowed out of commercial airliners entirely after the L-1011. And McDonnell Douglas, stubborn to the end, tried to push the MD-11, a stretched, modernized DC-10 that was supposed to save the Trijet legacy. It didn't. Airlines found it underperformed on range promises, burned too much fuel, and was quickly overshadowed by the Boeing 777 and Airbus A330. Ouch. So yeah, the Trijet wasn't just losing, it was bleeding out. But don't think the story ends here, because while airlines were ditching Trijets like last year's fashion trend, there's still one chapter left. The afterlife. cargo fleets, VIP jets, and the stubborn survival of 3 engines in niche corners of aviation. And that's where we're headed in Chapter 5, Extinction and Afterlife. Hey, quick pit stop before we land this thing. If you're still watching right now, you're clearly hooked on aviation stories as much as I am. So don't let this be our last flight together. Hit that subscribe button, drop a comment about your favorite Trijet memory, and let's keep this aviation nerd club alive. Trust me, Chapter 5 is where the twist ending lives. By the 90s, the Trijet wasn't just limping, it was on life support. The industry had spoken, and the verdict was clear. 3 engines were one too many. Airlines were selling off their DC-10s, retiring their L-1011s, and phasing out the 727s. The cool middle child of aviation history had officially been grounded. But here's the twist. Trijets didn't vanish overnight. They staged a weird little afterlife, not as glamorous passenger jets, but as workhorses and VIP toys. Let's start with cargo. Enter the DC-10 and its sleeker cousin, the MD-11. Passenger airlines were done with them, but cargo carriers saw opportunity. FedEx, UPS, Lufthansa Cargo, they all scooped them up. Why? Because cargo doesn't complain about noise. Cargo doesn't care if the cabin looks dated. And cargo definitely doesn't read headlines about past crashes. For freight, the Trijet was still a tank. The MD-11 in particular carved out a second career as the freighter king. Sure, it never lived up to its passenger promises. Airlines hated that it fell short on range and efficiency. But as a freighter, it didn't need to. With 3 engines and a cavernous belly, it could hold boxes like a champ. Even today, you can still spot MD-11s thundering into Memphis or Cologne, hauling packages instead of people. Meanwhile, the 727 went from passenger darling to utility mule. After retirement from airlines, many were converted into cargo birds. Some even became corporate jets, because apparently nothing says executive power move like your own private 727 parked on the ramp. And then there's the Falcon series. Dassault, the French bizjet maker, kept the Trijet flame alive with the Falcon 50, Falcon 900, and Falcon 7X. These sleek private jets proved that in niche markets, 3 engines still had a role. Long range, over-water safety redundancy, and the ability to slip into smaller airports made them perfect for billionaires and government officials. When you're flying solo over the Atlantic with champagne in hand, having that extra engine feels less like overkill and more like peace of mind. Analogy time, it's like the Trijet didn't die, it just got promoted. No longer hauling the masses, but chauffeuring the elite and hauling Amazon boxes. From rock star to roadie, still in the game, just behind the scenes. Of course, this afterlife comes with an expiration date. Cargo airlines are gradually retiring their DC-10s and MD-11s, replacing them with twins like the 777F and A350F. Even Dassault's Falcons are slowly moving toward twin-engine designs. The writing's on the wall. The Trijet's days are truly numbered. But here's the thing, Trijets left a legacy. They shaped routes, opened markets, and proved that bold engineering ideas can dominate for decades before the tide turns. They were the perfect answer for their time. And when that time ended, they didn't just vanish. They adapted. Look up today, and you might still catch a glimpse of a Trijet roaring overhead. Maybe it's an MD-11 freighter heading out on a midnight cargo run. Maybe it's a Falcon jet slipping quietly into a private terminal. They're ghosts of a golden age, still hanging on, still refusing to be forgotten. And that's the beauty of aviation history. Planes come and go, but none truly disappear. They leave echoes and design choices and pilot memories in the sound of a tail-mounted engine spooling up. The Trijet may be a relic now, but for decades, it was the symbol of possibility. So next time you see an old 727 parked in the desert, or hear the thunder of an MD-11 freighter, remember, this was once the king of the skies. And in its own stubborn way, it still kind of is.